Ms. Vetten, I'm going to start with the first thing you said. You told the tribunal that apart from your vast papers you've written, you actually have testified as an expert in matters of this nature. Is that right?
Yes.
And can I put this to you that you've testified in those matters, not as a supporter of a complainant, but an expert and intellectual helping a tribunal reach a decision, right?
Correct.
And I'm going to put a couple of things to you that you should know then, because you've testified as an expert before. Would you agree with me let me set these principles as an expert now, just as principles of expert evidence. Do you agree that expert evidence presented should be seen to be an independent product of the expert, uninfluenced as to form or content by the exigencies of litigation? Do you agree with that principle in your
If you
experience?
can go into what you mean by the exigencies of litigation.
I'm saying you don't have to support one side. You come as an expert, as an intellectual, because you are independent, you are honest, you are frank, you are giving an analysis, but you are not supporting one side in litigation.
Yes, that is the purpose of expert testimony. It's to be a subject expert.
Please, ma'am, just give me an answer. Don't. I'm saying, do you agree?
I agree.
Thank you. The next is, an expert witness should provide independent assistance to the court by way of objective, unbiased opinion in relation to matters within his or her expertise. Do you agree?
That is a general principle.
Do you agree?
I agree.
Thank you. Do you agree that this means that an expert actually should not come to a forum in order to support a particular litigant? Because that is the job of the tribunal, to make a decision, or the job of the different lawyers. Your job is to give a frank, honest, objective, unbiased opinion.
That is correct.
An expert witness should state the facts or assumptions upon which his or her opinion is based.
That is correct.
An expert should not omit to consider material which could detract from his concluded opinion.
That is correct.
Do you agree with me that an expert who omits things that they think may not be consistent with their finding or conclusion is not an independent expert?
That would be correct.
Yeah. So an expert who has large chunks of things he or she omits because they are not consistent with a particular line of his conclusions cannot be trusted.
That is overdrawing an opinion. I think there needs to be asked why things, what has been looked at and what has not been looked at.
You are a witness. You're not going to be an expert with my questions. I'm asking you. You cannot trust an expert witness who omits large chunks of things that are not consistent with the conclusion she wants to make. She must consider everything that is found in the record in order to give an intellectual input. She must assess, including the things that may not be consistent with what she or he likes.
As a general statement?
Well, as a specific statement?
Same thing. It's a general statement. You need to give a specific example.
No, I'm saying if you omit certain things, it will impact on your opinion, on your evidence, as an expert who's supposed to be independent.
As a general point, yes.
And so a tribunal cannot and should never trust an expert who supports a particular version or who is sympathetic towards a particular version in that litigation. You should agree with me.
As a general point.
Ma'am, you keep saying as a general point. You want us to engage in this. You're trying to be clever with me. I'm asking you, a tribunal should not, Lisa Vetten, you are an intellectual and I respect you. And I think this is something we must engage in. That a tribunal calls an expert not to support a litigant, but to give them what they don't have, which is an expert objective opinion that takes into account a variety of incidents that have happened that are found in the record. Surely you know this.
No, that I would agree with. If there's what there is in the record, that is what one goes on.
And so the expert who cherry picks, if we find in litigation that the expert cherry picks what suits them, what is sort of consistent with what they want, cannot be trusted by a tribunal.
I was asked to give evidence on sexual harassment. And looking at the general context in which sexual harassment occurs, that is how I read the record.
You remember my question to you?
I'm explaining to you, when you're asking about omitting, there are particular things you're going to look for because you're being asked to look in relation to sexual
You remember
harassment.
my question, Ms. Vetten? Please, I don't want to be rude to you, and I don't want you to try to be smart with me. Let's be civil with each other. What was my question?
Your question was whether or not, it was about the omission of evidence and whether or not people can be trusted if they omit
Yeah,
evidence.
Yes, I'm saying, should a tribunal trust a so-called expert or intellectual who cherry picks rather than look at every aspect and give an analysis? Should they trust an intellectual like that or an expert? Because we're not experts here, you are. And we must trust you. Should a tribunal, as a general point, trust an expert who cherry picks and omits certain things in order to support one side?
I suggest an amendment to the question, unless it is a quotation. How about replacing trust with rely? Can the tribunal rely?
Chair, I'll use the words you prefer. But I think they mean the same, because in order to rely on something, you must trust the person who gives you the opinion. But if you prefer rely, that's fine. Can a tribunal, you agree with me that a tribunal, any tribunal, should not trust someone who is an expert who cherry picks certain things and omits others to suit a particular interpretation?
I think I've said to you as a general point, no, you can't.
Ma'am, you keep saying as a general point, then you must be able to tell me what's the other side, which is a specific point.
No, it's the principle. I'm agreeing with you, that's the principle.
Okay, yeah, so please, when I ask whether you agree or not, just tell me you agree, because I don't know what you mean when you say as a general point. The last principle on this that I want to check with you is, and that's where I'm going to go after this, if an expert's opinion is not properly researched, but he or she considers that insufficient data is available, then this must be stated with an indication that the opinion is no more than a provisional one. You agree with that?
That's never been asked before, because what's been asked is to give a basis on how you arrive, the information that you arrived at your opinion. You give it, then it's up to the court to assess whether that was sufficient.
Do you agree with me? Is that a yes?
Yes, if you are clear about what you relied on.
It's fine, ma'am. We have time with you. I'm going to have time with you. Days and days. Well, I'm going to take you to a couple of things that you've said. One is that let me put this to you right up front so that you and me intellectually are frank with each other. If I put the proposition to you that during your testimony today, you actually placed more emphasis on psychoanalyzing the parties involved. Am I accurate? Is that your testimony also ventures into psychoanalysis of why individuals do or act in certain way? Am I correct? You don't?
Psychoanalysis is a very specific technical term that requires specific training, which I do not have.
That's why you're here, man. So when you are analyzing why someone behaves in a particular way or doesn't behave in a particular way, In what realm is that?
You have sociological analysis, you have historical analysis, you have legal analysis.
Sure.
There are a whole range of ways in which you can approach the ways in which you can approach analysis.
And when you are analyzing behavioral patterns,
You can do that you can do that from a sociological point of view.
no, but I'm saying but what else can you do it from?
Well, if I had
Am I
personally,
wrong if I say it's also a psychological analysis, apart from what you've just said? Not
if you have followed the tools of psychological analysis and what meets psychological analysis, then yes, it would be. But I would not be offering you psychological analysis.
yes. So I mean, so if you make a psychological analysis without using the exact tools, that analysis should be discarded.
It depends on what you mean by a psychological analysis. If you mean offering a diagnosis of somebody, giving them a psychological label, that would be inappropriate. You would have to require certain tests to have been done, which I certainly did not do.
In the sociological one?
The sociological analysis would be looking at within the realm of what we know socially and within research, which would look at things like impact. Does this fit what we know?
And in many of the things you said, you mentioned the word context, right? I want to interrogate the point context for an intellectual. Is that, am I correct that it's an endless list of factors that one must consider? Let's call them the surrounding circumstances of a particular situation. I'm not an expert, I'm just saying, teasing this with you. Would it mean looking at different circumstances that surround a particular issue that you're analyzing?
Yes, there's a range of, as you say, context has multiple variables and considerations.
And in this, you would actually have to add, and let me just guess, you would agree with me that you would look at, let's say, culture. Is that something important?
That would certainly be part of the consideration.
And you would look, and I think you did it to some way, patterns of behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
You would also look at language.
You would.
And you would also look at things that affect social relations in a given society, right?
Mm-hmm.
You would look at gender, as you correctly do in your summary, is that you would look at the particular relations between genders, right?
Mm-hmm.
You would also look at particular imposition of superior cultures over others. It means,
that you could do, depending on the nature of the analysis you
yeah,
were doing.
I'm saying, for instance, and I agree with you, and I've read a lot of things you've written, and I respect what you've written. You would actually look at if you looked at male and female, let's call it stereotypical analysis, you would have to consider the fact that in a given society, males occupy a dominant position and therefore may impose, if you analyze that, and I think you did it correctly, you must take into account those unequal relations.
Mm-hmm. And I think what you, depending again on the nature of the analysis, you would look at all the other things that interact with gender to shape how people relate.
In fact, in the introduction of your paper, and correct me if I'm wrong, you take an analysis that combines three theories of sexual harassment. And I'm not saying they're exhaustive. I'm just saying, and you correct, I think you take a feminist approach to it. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you also take what you call it, or they call it a biological, some people call it stereotypical, but a biological approach to sexual harassment.
No, I don't take a biological approach.
Okay, so
just to be very clear, what I'm saying is the biological approach has functioned as an excuse.
Yes, yes.
It is. I'm not saying
yes.
biology explains
Sorry,
it.
I'm not saying you adopt it. I'm
No,
saying
I don't.
you actually talk about those responses that people have made to sexual harassment, right? But not that you personally adopt it. Do you agree with me that in your testimony, and we'll do this later, you do omit large chunks of things that are contained in what Ms. Mengo, the complainant, actually said?
That's true, because to repeat her evidence would take well, it's been said, it took her 2 weeks. You don't need me to come and repeat all of it again. So what I've presented to you is a reading of it through a particular lens, which I tried to explain.
Yes, I'm trying to compare. You're right. But I'm trying to compare that. But actually, you don't have that reluctance in analyzing what the respondent says and writes. Suddenly, when it comes to the respondent, you're quite diligent in talking about what he says. And when it comes to Miss Mengo, you're quite conscious of time and length.
Only because I was asked to hurry up. I can continue and go into great detail with the complainant if you'd like me to.
Yes, I'm saying in your choice of what you cut out when you hurry up, you choose to omit the things, I'm going to take you to them, the things that she says. That choice of yours, is it an objective, independent choice, or just it happened by chance?
No, I do pull out in my evidence, I do pull out the examples of what she's saying in response to him and look at that.
I agree. I didn't say you omit everything she says, but you agreed with me that you omit large chunks in your desire to hurry up. You do omit large chunks of what she says, and you choose to focus on what the respondent says. Don't you agree with me? You said it's because you were hurrying up.
I'm giving her response and I'm giving his response.
No, ma'am. You've agreed that you omitted those chunks because you don't want to repeat everything she said. And all I'm saying to you is that that choice, I'm putting it to you, that choice you make of what you omit is a deliberate choice. You could have chosen the things she says, like, I want you to come to me strong. You could come out and concentrate it on where she says, I want you to continue to desire me so that when you get to me, you're strong. You omit those things.
No, I didn't. I think I did highlight that. I used that as an example of where she is accommodating him when she says, when I'm strong to stand on my feet.
Yes.
I did look at that.
No, I'm going to take you there. I'm not talking about that. We're going to get there. But you agree with me, and let's not deal with this. You omitted because you were hurrying up.
I certainly didn't repeat all the testimony or everything I was going to say.
Yeah.
That's true.
But all I'm saying to you is that in this, you choose to focus on what you think makes a case for what I think is your theory, is that the respondent acted inappropriately. That's your theory at the end, actually.
I'm asked to make an opinion, so it's not a theory.
No.
That is my opinion.
I'm saying your opinion must be based on everything that's in the record. You are not just brought here to sympathize with a complainant or a victim or a respondent. You are brought here to give us an analysis by an intellectual who does not support one side. By the way, it's not wrong to support one side, but it's important to declare it. I'm saying your choice of what you omit is based on the fact that you, Lisa Vetten, supports the complainant in sexual harassment issues. And there's nothing wrong with that. All I'm saying to you is that an intellectual is also an intellectual and an expert because they are honest enough to state their biases. That's what makes you an intellectual, is the ability to honestly not have no bias, but your function in the world is not to be unbiased, but it's to be honest and declare your bias. That's all I'm asking you.
I was asked to give an opinion on sexual harassment. If I had read this and come to the conclusion that this was a happy, egalitarian, good relationship, I would have said that. And there have been situations where that is the conclusion I've come to, that I cannot find, that there does not appear to be makings of unwanted conduct here.
Well,
So it will depend on what's in here.
Yeah, let me start with a shortcoming then.
Okay.
In your analysis, if you don't agree with me that you are biased in favor of the complainant, because that's what I sense. And as I said to you, I don't believe that is wrong. And you've written so many things, Lisa Vetten, that help women in this situation. And I think an intellectual must declare that and say, you know, if you called me, Muzi Sikhakhane, to testify about issues that affect black people, I would tell you right up front that actually my bias is in favor of black people. I'm not the right intellectual or the right academic or expert. And I'm asking you honestly, Lisa, as someone whose work I respect, is that do you think, given the fact that you declare here that you focused on her examination in chief and not so much on cross-examination, right? Am I recording you correctly?
Yeah.
So you do not have the totality of the conversation, of the analysis, because you focused on her testimony rather than weaknesses that may come when a person is cross-examined. Do you think, with what you declared, you are able to come up with something that is intellectually rigorous to help a process when you do not have a feel of the entire set of facts stated and critiqued? Do you think an intellectual can call themselves objective, as the principles say, if they have not read in depth both aspects of what is before the tribunal factually? Can they help?
That's why I was upfront about what I had read and what I hadn't read. And
I'm agreeing with you.
yeah,
I'm
and that is
saying-
also my expertise derives from working with complainants. That's why I do not testify on the behalf of necessarily of those accused, because I don't have expertise in that regard.
Absolutely. And so you right where I want us to go. And I'm not tricking you. I'm treating you with all the respect I have, because I do have respect for you. I've read every article you've written. All I'm saying to you is that as an intellectual who comes to assist, and I respect the fact that you've always come to assist victims, most of whom are women, and that's a great job. All I'm saying to you is that that bias is unhelpful in a situation where you are called upon to look at the record, but in looking at the record, you do not look at certain aspects that would complete the picture. Now, every intellectual, every academic will tell you that what makes them a cut above the rest as intellectuals and experts is that they are not like me, Muzi Sikhakhane, or anybody sitting here. They are able to overcome, rise above their own biases so that they present objective and they read even what does not agree or is consistent with their view. Do you think, having missed to read where that examination in chief is contested, your analysis is deficient to assist the process? Your views, you are entitled to them. But your analysis is not objective if you declare that your analysis is based on reading one aspect that's untested. That's all I'm saying to you.
My analysis is predominantly focused on the WhatsApps. My analysis is predominantly focused on the WhatsApps, which is what you have and what the complainant has. You will test my version under cross-examination.
No, I agree. All I'm saying is that when you don't have the totality of the record, it has an impact on the intellectual output, which is what is required here. We actually could have called anyone if we wanted views of people who sympathize with men who harass or victims who are harassed. We could have called anybody. We could have called a journalist. We could have called anybody. We called you. You were called. And we respected that you are called. Because you are going to offer us what an intellectual should offer, why you are a cut above us, it's because you read everything, including what does not make your case. That's what makes you different from us. We read what we like, we discard what we don't. As an intellectual, your analysis is deficient if you've declared what you've declared. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying it's deficient, does not meet the standard called objective. Would you agree with me?
No, I wouldn't, because my primary form of analysis was based on the WhatsApps. Some of the evidence in chief I read because there was a lot of confusion around translation and what words meant. So it was to gain some clarity around that. I did have a look at that. My evidence was my brief was to look at these WhatsApps. You will test what I have to say through cross-examination, and that's where you test whether or not I am objective, do offer expertise or don't offer expertise.
Would what you say, and I think you must agree with me here, you the expert, when you read the totality of things, you must also read the version of the person you may probably not like, the so-called perpetrator. It's important for you as an intellectual to take that into account in coming to whatever opinion you come to. It's important to read everything. I'm not saying you're wrong, and I'm not saying your opinions are illegitimate. I'm saying as an intellectual process for which you are called, which is expertise, you are called upon to evaluate a wide variety of existing circumstances in a given intellectual project and come up with something not which is just your subjective view, but something supported by data that you have. And if you don't, you say so.
The primary data is the WhatsApps. That's what I focused on, which is why you won't find me commenting on the videos or any of the other evidence that was suggested. I don't know about that. I haven't read that. This I can read for myself.
Yes.
And that's,
Well, that's not your fault, Ms. Vetten. If people called you to analyze only the WhatsApps, it's not your fault. All I'm saying to you, forget the lawyers who call you because they have a case to fight. You don't. All I'm saying to you, your analysis is deficient. And not because you are not intellectual. It's deficient if you are unable to deal with what you call context. But context is a wide variety of factors and circumstances present, including versions of different players in a particular event. I'm saying because you were instructed just to look at WhatsApp, some of which you omitted, but you told us why, the outcome of your analysis may not be a totality of an analysis that should be made to assist. It may just constitute a version of what you read, an analysis of individuals and their behavioral patterns, as you say. But we can't call it objective and rely on it because it doesn't take into account other aspects that should be poured into the context.
well, to be frank, I don't have the judge president's version. I haven't heard it yet. So it is obviously hard to be able to know what he would say. If I had his statement, then that would be different, but I don't have his statement.
Well, you do. What did his answering affidavit? Did you read his answering
I
affidavit?
did not get a copy of his answering affidavit.
Right. All I'm saying to you, and please
which
hear
I was
me,
not aware existed.
Absolutely. Please hear me well. I could never attack an intellectual because you do great work. All I'm saying is that it's important for you to be given all material that is available when people want you to make an opinion. And as I tell you now and you confirm, first, because you were told to hurry up, there's something you didn't read. You declared that, right? You declared that you actually didn't have much sight into the cross-examination, right? We know now that you didn't even bother to read, or you were not given, you were not given by those who want you here. They did not give you his version that already is in the papers, right? With that in mind, I want to put this to you. Having not been given material sufficient for you to make an informed, objective analysis, I'm putting it to you that your analysis, because of that, is deficient for present purposes. It would be nice if you knew his version, at least in the affidavit.
You will presumably put that to me under cross-examination.
No, I am.
And then I will agree or disagree.
I'm
and
putting
tell
it
you
to,
whether or not.
I'm putting it to you that because you did not have sight of his version, at least in the affidavit, there is something missing in your analysis.
Yes, I don't have his analysis. That's correct.
Yeah. And when you look at the record, you also do not look at in depth, as you said. When the version of the complainant is tested, because the test for truth of versions of people, and I'm not even suggesting that the respondent's version in the affidavit is the and be all of this, because it should be tested. The real test that an intellectual should go to when assessing something and they're not a supporter of one side is where this version of one person is tested. That for me, and I think is the crux that intellectuals like yourself do. You read sometimes what's uncomfortable, what contradicts your views, and that's when the product is intellectually sound. Not when you avoid where ideas and versions are tested.
I don't have, as I said to you, I didn't have some of those materials.
Yes. Would you agree with me that because of that, not because of your fault, you are unhelpful? Your version is unhelpful. Your opinion is unhelpful. Not because you are not intellectual, because it lacks those aspects.
That's not my decision to make. That is the tribunal, that is the chair and the panel's
It's fine.
decision
I'm
to make.
putting it to you that because of what you've agreed, you did not look at. It makes your opinion biased, one-sided, and incomplete.
I'm going to disagree with you
It's fine.
because what I was also giving general evidence on was on sexual harassment. It's context, how it is thought about, in order to be able to provide a context within which to interpret the complainant's evidence.
I'm going to get
So,
there.
I mean, because I haven't even interviewed the complainant either, so I wouldn't know exactly
I'm
her
going to
particular insight. So, in that sense, it should make a contribution.
I'm going to get there. Lisa Vetten, I'm not suggesting that your views don't make a contribution. They do. Most papers you write do. They've helped many women be understood better, because this is a serious matter that women face. All I'm saying to you is that when you lack material for you to make an informed opinion for purposes of a tribunal, it's deficient. Not that you are deficient. I'm saying the outcome is compromised intellectually.
Within the scope of within the scope of the brief, that is what I have provided evidence on. That will be up to the chair and his assessors to decide whether or not it added value.
I'm going to take you to your paper. I'm going to take you to your paper for purposes of today, because I'm going to take you tomorrow to the details of the things that I think factually you omitted, and you can tell me why. But I want to take you to your paper. And as I said it, I declared it here, that I'm unable to question your expertise, because I think you are an expert and you've written enough on the subject in the country. Let's go to your part on 2, which is the method employed to arrive at your opinion. Let me just read what you say, because it's an important analysis, where you say, it is widely assumed that for biological reasons, women and men's expression and experience of their sexuality is not the same. Because their sexual urges are assumed to be more potent than those of women, men have been granted the active role in sexual encounters and women a more docile and compliant role. Put differently, and this is where I'm going to emphasize because you put a footnote. Put differently, where men find attractive and pursue, women attract only passively. Well, you did agree with me, and I'm not saying you accept this, I think you're making an analysis. you did agree with me that an expert must put forth whatever they rely on to make a particular analysis. You right? You agree with me?
Sure, you're wanting references.
No, I'm saying if you make, no, I'll go to the references. Don't worry. I know the reference you made. All I'm saying to you is that you make a reference to a paper,
Mm.
right? And of course, this paper, we don't know what it is, right? All we know is that it's a paper written by Graham and Papudi in 2018. Would you be so kind as to, and it makes this proposition. I'm not saying you agree with the proposition, but I'm saying in light of what we said is that you must put forth material that you rely on. Because you didn't, this paper is not before us. Would you tell us which paper is this and where does it make this point?
Bear in mind that this is a summary that was prepared within the space of under 24 hours. So it did not, I would have liked to have given you a full reference list, but there was not the
It's
opportunity
fine.
to do
It's
that.
fine.
If you can give me a moment to look at my laptop.
By all means.
It is from Reproductive Health in Sub-Saharan Africa, a paper by Lauren Graham and Memory Mpapuli, and the guy does and you don't. They do you instead. Young people's narratives of gender and sexuality in a low context, in a low-income context of South Africa.
Right. Let's go to this paper. Although we don't have it, but I tried to read what it's about. Do you agree with me that this paper was looking at the multifaceted nature of young people's responses to sexuality and masculinity, amongst other things? Do you agree with me that this paper actually was written based on interviews with 9 young people between the age of 18 and 28 from an informal settlement?
Yes.
Do you agree that this paper actually itself concludes, having interviewed Dinewo, Rasta, Mapule, all of them who are here, this paper makes the conclusion that actually the approach of young people to masculinity and femininity is diverse.
Yes, that is what they're concluding. But bear in mind, what I'm saying is what are taken as generalized truth, even though that's not people's lived reality.
Do you agree with me that this paper actually tells us that this gender identity by these young people between the age of 18 and 28 who live in particular specific economic, socio-economic conditions, even they negotiate gender identity? That's what it says.
Yes, and that I think is that's the point I perhaps didn't make sufficiently clearly for you in the paragraph, is that we live in societies that give us these broad constructed notions of this is how women are, this is how men are. But the day-to-day reality is different. This is why these are myths and stereotypes.
Yes.
It's because the idea is that men do this, women do that. They are not the reality.
Yes, all I'm saying to you is that had I not pulled out this paper and read it in small little time that I had, the tribunal in front of whom you are an intellectual, would not have had access to it, would not have known these assumptions. They would not have known what Mapule actually says, what Rasta says, what Dineo says. In fact, this proposition is the opposite of the conclusion of this paper.
My opening sentence is, it is widely assumed. So assumes doesn't mean this is fact or truth. It's what people think. It's what they assume.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that is the case. So I'm giving here this assumption on which society, and I gave the examples of how we distinguish between men and women's sexuality in terms of linguistic terms, as if it was different, and construct a society around that assumed difference, when the reality is much more complex. And that is a mistake. My point I'm trying to make here is that this is an assumption. It is not necessarily a reality or a truth.
Well,
And
I'm
you
saying
can
to
read
you,
many authors on this.
this paper does not make that assumption.
No. What? This paper is an illustration, or it's trying to say this assumption is being made. Let me try and be very clear, is that in general, and this is where I was saying the origins of rape myths come from, is this idea that men chase, women sit back and wait. That is not the reality. Nonetheless, even though that is not the reality, we have built, and you can look at the example of the cautionary rule. I use the example of language. We have built a society around that as if, even though it is an assumption.
Yeah, I agree, Lisa. All I'm saying
So that's what I'm trying to say, is that it creates complications when we live as if, as if it is a truth.
well, in fact, you see, that is why I'm testing you as an intellectual when you put a reference, is that this reference to this paper doesn't justice to this paper. If you read towards the end of this paper, and I'll direct you when you have time to read at the interview by the young person called Dineo, who contradicts a number of other male respondents. She contradicts Rasta, who's unemployed, right, in that paper. So actually, the paper itself, as much as you say it's widely assumed, this paper actually is telling us, although it's not conclusive, it's telling us not to make statements like that, because the widely assumed also is an assumption on its own, that phrase, which contradicts the findings they wanted to show us. Graham and Papudi want to show us this, and I want to comment. They want to show us that even if you go to an informal settlement that they did, you interview people who live under very, very depressed socio-economic conditions, you get an array of views about gender, about sexuality, and about masculinity. You agree with me?
Yes.
In fact, Dineo in that interview, a young person who's interviewed, having being interviewed about an assumption that women are docile in these relations, actually demonstrates that even in those circumstances where males and women relate in an environment of really dire economic situations, there's an emergence of young women who are questioning those generalizations about them and reject the notion that a woman is passive. In fact, that's what she says.
Yes, and that is why I use the language of it is widely assumed. What I am trying to point to is the constructedness, the socially constructed nature of gender. This is one example of that social constructedness that is not necessarily the experience of everyday life. But the problem can be when people walk around thinking that social construction is the truth, and somebody comes along who does not behave as if the social construction is a truth, they can face difficulties and opposition. It's also, I think, widely acknowledged as part of gender theory that there is resistance. I mean, where would the feminist movement have come from if it agreed with this?
Yes.
It would not have. So I am just trying to say there is a socially constructed set of ideas about gender. and sex as well, if you like. You've seen the whole movement around transgender identity, saying that even sex is a construct.
Yes.
So I am just trying to say here, there are these broad social constructions that are not actually helpful because of what they've done. So, I mean, if you take the cautionary rule, which was also based on the idea of women who were passive, and then would look askance on women who were more sexually active. That is simply my point. It's not to give a truth about society, because that is correct. It is contested. It isn't the way people live their lives every day. And those who don't live within the stereotypes can have a very difficult time. Plus, one also has to take into account the fact that, as you've alluded to, there are generational differences, there are historical differences, there are cultural differences, all manner of differences. But the fact is, when you live within a dominant system that constructs sexuality and a gender identity in a particular way, it can be difficult because it measures people against standards that might not actually accord with their lives. So what I am trying to point to is that we have lived in a society that has behaved as if it is a truth and a biological fact of nature that men are X and women are Y, even though that is a social construct. That's all I'm trying to say. And then to point to the fact that because the social construct is in place, it has legitimized a certain amount of violence. That's all my point. And that their research is in line with that. People don't live their lives as stereotypes. They lead them as complex people.
You would be surprised that I actually agree with you on some of these theories, because the emphasis is on dominance and sexual violence, right? You agree with me? You also stated when you started that sexual harassment as a notion is complex. And I think that's why you're testifying. You're not testifying because you know the truth. It's because it's complex. This paper, while it deals with those things, but you will agree with me, does not deal with the complexity of sexual harassment.
No, it deals with the complexity of gender identity.
Yes.
And that's the point. Is for sexual harassment, it needs to emerge. The way we have come to understand sexual harassment depends on particular kinds of gender identities and assumptions around what goes with a gender identity. Sure. And I think we've all seen over the last couple of years, particularly I think in relation to transgender identities, is that the fixedness of those gender identities has become contested.
Fine, Ms. Vetten. The 2 points I was making to you is that as an intellectual, you agreed with me that the assumptions you make must be based on something you declare, a paper that you rely on. I'm saying I had to find out that Graham and Mpapudi have never written anything together except in 2018 for me to reach this point of reading. All I'm saying is that, yes, you say you had 24 hours. I had less time than you. All I'm saying is that as an intellectual, the assumptions you made or you point to would have been better if we had access, the tribunal had access to the specifics of this paper, because one can misunderstand what you're saying.
Sure, if I'd had the time, I would have given you a whole paper on gender theory with full references. But that tends not to be appreciated.
I'm going to just make one point and then we wrap up as we stop. One of the statements made on the 12th of May, by the evidence leader about why, and correctly, you were found late, is that you're actually an expert of the last resort, because they could not find someone who is Xhosa speaking or of that culture. That's what we were told. And the question I want to ask you, because I don't dispute that, is would culture and language be relevant and significant if one has to analyze communication between two people of a particular culture and language? Would you agree that as an intellectual, that amongst factors that you would call context, culture and language are an essential component of communication between people of a particular culture and region and country and sexual orientation and education?
Yes.
Yes. And if you do not have access to the nuances of that culture and that language, your analysis may be completely mistaken.
That could certainly be possible.
Because language itself has a dual character, you would agree with me. It communicates culture, it communicates a message. It means it's based on this. Would you agree with me?
Correct?
And so if you do not have access to those cultural and linguistic nuances, you may actually miss the messaging in the conversation.
That is partly why I looked at the evidence in chief, was to see what was happening in the translation and what was being said, and why I specifically requested the WhatsApps with the translations so that I could get some insight.
And the last question, and I'm asking this really, really innocently, if it doesn't sound right, I don't mean to, is that in the context of South Africa, an analysis of language is also riddled with an imposition of whiteness and English in interpreting vernacular, that it must make logic in English. Would you say that is not the case in our context?
I did not translate isiXhosa phrases. I could only work with what the person had put, with what the translator had said there and what the interpreter said there. I have to rely on that and defer to that.
Thank you, and I respect that. All I was saying is that the language, you and me, and I agree that language and culture are important in interpreting nuances of a conversation. You agree with me?
That would be correct.
Thank you. Chair, I would like to leave it there. I think it's exactly 3:30, and continue tomorrow. For today, yes, yes. Thank you, Chair.
Actually, I had raised my hand because I wanted to ask something before you left.
I'm sorry,
The
Chair.
paper, Graham and Papuli. So you didn't see my hand. That's fine. What I wanted to know was, in that paper, does Mapule or Dineo, do they contest statement or theory that women are? I don't think I came out clearly on that. Do they contest the statement or notion that women are passive?
Are you asking me or the expert?
No, I'm asking.
Oh, yeah.
You.
Well, I hope I'm right. She quoted this paper. I'm just a lawyer. I was reading something that's not in my turf. But my reading of the English language use is that they don't offer opinions. Mapule, Dineo, Rasta, and others are simply, let's call it for lack of a better, guinea pigs. It's one of those things where researchers walk into a poor area and interview people and emerge experts. So they don't necessarily agree. They exhibit what is a conclusion, which is you cannot make, and she is right, you cannot make a generalized conclusion about passivity, because even in these conditions of depressed communities, women themselves are beginning to negotiate power in those circumstances. And they say these assumptions themselves are inaccurate, of assuming that women by nature are just little kids who are passive, let alone in situations of the respondents here. They were even interviewing people who live in an informal settlement, who are poor, who don't work, who depend sometimes on parents and men to support them. But even there, the women who are interviewed, I'm not saying they intellectually make this point, but the women who are interviewed, the young women, they give a diversity of views, but there is an emergence of what the authors call the fluidity and the sort of permanently negotiated view of gender and sexuality, even in those communities. They say it's contested and fluid, and the assumptions are not right. Thank you, Chair.
That is the clarity or the information I wanted to get. Thank you very much. And then we will adjourn now, and then we will start at 9:30 tomorrow.
Thank you, Chair.
We adjourn now. You are not excused, Ms. Vettel. Please be here tomorrow. Anytime, but not later than 9:30. We adjourn now.